There are three key elements in our strategy. The first is NATO expansion, and in many ways the most important. And I'll talk in some detail about that in a second. But as you all know, since the Cold War ended, starting with the Clinton administration, we have been moving NATO eastward toward Russia's border. And the Russians have said, this is an absolute no-no. And I'll walk you through the story in a minute. Second is EU expansion. EU expansion is all about integrating Ukraine economically into the West, the way we are in the process of integrating Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, the Baltic states into the West. And of course, we're doing that with NATO as well. These are two sets of institutions, NATO, military institution, the EU, an economic institution. And the idea, again, is to take Ukraine, peel it away from Russia, and make it part of the West. The third part of the story is fostering an orange revolution. This is all about promoting democracy in Ukraine and in other places. As you all know, the United States runs around the world trying to topple regimes and put in their place democratically elected regimes. And for almost all of you, me included, it's hard to be against promoting democracy. We all love democracy. But if you're Vladimir Putin, or if you're part of the leadership in Beijing, when the United States talks about democracy promotion, that means toppling your regime. And you won't be surprised to hear this. They don't like that in Beijing, and they don't like that in Moscow. Right? They do not like that. Right? The Chinese believe that we're behind the protests in Hong Kong. You go to Beijing and you talk to Chinese elites, the idea that we're promoting democracy around the world, and especially in East Asia, just drives them crazy because they think they're in the crosshairs. And you know what? They are in the crosshairs because our basic strategy is to topple regimes all over the world, not simply because we like democracy, but because we believe that whoever gets elected will be pro-Western. So we're killing two birds with one stone. We're promoting democracy and getting leaders who are pro-American. But again, you can see the strategy here: NATO expansion, EU expansion, and promoting democracy.
Украина – это отдельная большая проблема, в том числе для нас.
The Ukrainian issue is a separate huge issue for us. I will tell you why. Ukraine is the closest country to us. We have always said that Ukraine is our sister country, and it is true. It is not just a Slavic people. It is the closest people to Russia. We have similar languages, culture, common history, religion, etc. Here is what I believe is completely unacceptable for us, addressing issues including controversial ones, as well as domestic issues of the former Soviet republics, through the so-called colored revolutions, through coups and unconstitutional means of toppling the current government. That is absolutely unacceptable. Our partners in the United States are not trying to hide the fact that they supported those opposed to President Yanukovych.
That the United States had something to do with the ousting of Yanukovych, and he had to flee to Russia.
I know this for sure. It is very simple. We have thousands of contacts and thousands of connections with people who live in Ukraine. And we know who had meetings and worked with people who overthrew Viktor Yanukovych, as well as when and where they did it. We know the ways the assistance was provided. We know how much they paid them. We know which territories and countries hosted trainings and how it was done. We know who the instructors were. We know everything. Well, actually, our US partners are not keeping it a secret.
You respect the sovereignty of Ukraine?
Certainly. However, we would like other countries to respect the sovereignty of other states, including Ukraine too. Respecting the sovereignty means preventing coups, unconstitutional actions, and illegitimate overthrowing of the legitimate government.
Ukraine is in a state of crisis 2 days after the country's democratically elected president was ousted following months of street protests that left at least 82 people dead. On Saturday, Ukraine's parliament voted to remove President Viktor Yanukovych, a move Yanukovych described as a coup.
I am absolutely confident that this is an example which our country and the whole world has seen, an example of a coup. I'm not going to leave Ukraine or go anywhere. I'm not going to resign. I'm a legitimately elected president. I was given guarantees by all international mediators who I worked with that they are giving me security guarantees. I will see how they will fulfill that role.
Nikolai Petra, let's begin with you in Ukraine. Do you agree with what the president, or now the former president, Yanukovych, said, that this is a coup?
Yes. It's pretty much a classical coup, because under the current constitution, the president may resign or be impeached, but only after the case is reviewed by the Constitutional Court and then voted by a 3/4 majority of the Parliament. And then in either case, either the Prime Minister or the Speaker of the Parliament must become the president. Instead, that's not what happened at all. There was an extraordinary session of Parliament after what was held, after most members were told there'd be no session and many had left town. And then under the chairmanship of the radical party Svoboda, this rump parliament declared that the president had self-removed himself from the presidency.
And what are the forces that brought this about, and what's happening right now in Ukraine? You're not in Kiev, you're in Odessa. What is even happening there?
The situation here in Odessa is pretty quiet. I would say that what led up to this is a coalition of three distinct forces. One is the group that started at the end of November of last year, genuine civic frustration with the government's decision to delay the signing of the EU association agreement. This was then seized upon by the parliamentary opposition, who joined belatedly and pressed the government for further concessions. And finally, the actual coup was accomplished thanks to the armed intervention of extreme nationalists led by the right sector.
Professor Timothy Snyder, would you agree with this assessment of what's taking place in Ukraine right now?
I think parts of it are exactly right. I think I would disagree with certain parts of it. For one thing, when it comes to the question of how these changes came about, it's a little bit reductionist just to mention opposition politicians, the right wing in Europe. The movement, the protest movement at the Maidan included millions of people in Kiev and all around the country. It included people from all walks of life, both genders. It included people from, included Muslims, it included Jews. It included professionals, it included working class people. And the main demand of the movement the entire time was something like normality, the rule of law. And the reason why this demand could bring together such people of different political orientations, such different regional backgrounds, is that they were faced up against someone, the previous president, Yanukovych, whose game was to monopolize both financial and political, as well as violent power in one place. The Constitution, legitimacy of which is now contested, was violated by him multiple times, and most of the protesters agreed to that. The second thing that I would modify a bit would be this idea that what happened is a coup, where now somehow everything is determined by the right.
Do you think this could lead to a split between East and West Ukraine, Professor Snyder?
No. On the contrary, the one thing which could lead to a split, the one thing that could lead to a split between East and West Ukraine would be some kind of intervention from the outside. We have good polling data taken over the course of the last 20 years from all regions of Ukraine. In no region of Ukraine do more than 4% of the population express a wish to leave the country. I'm pretty sure in most states in the United States the percentage will be much higher than that. The normal response is about 1%. Ukraine is a diverse country, but diversity is supposed to be a good thing. It's a multinational state in which both this revolution and the people who oppose this revolution have various kinds of ethnic identifications, various kinds of political commitments. The person who started the demonstrations in November was a Muslim. The first people who came were university students from Kiev. The next people who came were Red Army veterans. When the regime started to kill people, the first person who was killed was an Armenian. The second person who was killed was a Belarusian. In the sniper massacre of last week, which is what led to the change of power, which is what directly led to the change of power, one of the people who was killed was a left-wing ecologist Russian speaker from Kharkiv, Yevhen Kotlyov. Another was a Pole. The people who took part in this protest represent the variety of the country. The people who oppose these protests also come from various parts of the country. This is an essentially political dispute. And I think the good news is that once Yanukovych was removed, violence ceased, and now we're on a political track in which power is no longer in the hands of an interior minister who is killing people, and instead is within the chambers of parliament. Parliament has renewed the 2004 Constitution, which makes the system a parliamentary system, and it's called for elections in May. In those elections, people from all over the country will be able to express themselves in a normal post-revolutionary way. And then we'll see where things stand.
And last week, Democracy Now! Spoke to Russia scholar Stephen Cohen, who said Ukraine is essentially two different countries.
Ukraine is splitting apart down the middle because Ukraine is not one country, contrary to what the American media, which speaks about the Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. Historically, ethnically, religiously, culturally, politically, economically, it's two countries. One half wants to stay close to Russia. The other wants to go west.
That's Stephen Cohen. Nikolai Petro, would you agree?
Professor Cohen is right that there are very serious differences between the regions, and they go deep to the historical memory of not just what World War II was about, but what the end of the Russian Empire was about, what the Austrian-Hungarian Empire and Poland, the parts of Ukraine that were under it, were about. Professor Snyder is, however, also correct on the fact that much of the country does not want to dissolve. There is a commitment to being Ukrainian, and it would be indeed to everyone's advantage here if the country, if the parliament really did reach out to the segments of the population that are not, that have been effectively disenfranchised by the last coup. And however, I would tend to disagree, because the first steps within 24 hours that they've taken are exactly the opposite. Let me give you an example. The repeal of the law allowing Russian to be used locally, that's the main irritant in East-West relations within the Ukraine. The introduction of a resolution to outlaw the Communist Party of the Ukraine, which effectively is the only remaining opposition party in parliament. The consolidation of the powers of the Speaker of the Parliament and the acting president in a single individual, giving him greater powers than allowed under any Ukrainian constitution. Of course, the call for the arrest of the president. Now we have effectively a parliament that rules without any representation from the majority party, since most of the deputies of the east and the south of the country are afraid to set foot in parliament. Meanwhile, all across the country, headquarters of parties are being sacked by their opponents. This is the stage which we have for the elections for May 25th. Will they be fair? There's no money, according to the acting president and speaker. Vigilante militias routinely attack and disperse public gatherings they disapprove of. News broadcasts. Yesterday, Inter was interrupted by forces claiming to speak for the people. What do you think?